Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight we're travelling back to Victorian England, land of corsets, cobblestone streets, and industrial filth so thick it practically counts as a food group. But you're not here for tea parties or gas lamps. No, tonight you are the unfortunate owner of a persistent cough. The kind that doesn't go away, that leaves blood on your handkerchief, and that makes everyone around you slowly start avoiding eye contact. Congratulations, you have tuberculosis, or as they used to call it, consumption. It will consume you, thoroughly, elegantly, and with just enough time for everyone to write poetry about your tragic decline. Before you start picturing yourself as a pale, romantic waif in a candlelit sickbed, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if you find comfort in softly narrated misery and medically endorsed despair. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love to see who's tuning in from around the world. Now close your eyes, breathe deep, and try not to wheeze. You don't think much of it at first, just a little tickle in the back of the throat. Probably dust, maybe the coal smoke from the street, or the damp air clinging to your lungs like wet linen. You cough once, then again. It's nothing, everyone's coughing. It's London, for God's sake. The whole city sounds like a dying symphony of lungs. You keep moving. You go to work, you eat your bread, you shiver under thin blankets at night, and try to ignore how your chest aches just slightly more than it did yesterday. But it doesn't go away. In fact, it starts to set up shop. The cough becomes a regular visitor, then a resident, then your new best friend. It wakes you in the night and follows you through the day. You try to stifle it, especially at work, where your boss is already muttering about sick leave being a luxury for the idle. You chew mint leaves, drink hot water with vinegar, breathe shallowly to avoid triggering another fit. It doesn't help. The tickle becomes a rasp, the rasp becomes a rattle, and then one morning you cough into your handkerchief and see the unmistakable red bloom of blood. Just a little, but enough. A signature, really, the disease signing its name. That's the moment it stops being a nuisance and starts being a sentence. You know what this is. Everyone does. They might not use the word tuberculosis. It's still not entirely common in your circles. But consumption? Oh yes, that one's familiar. It's whispered on doorsteps, muttered in sick rooms, printed in the obituary column beneath phrases like peacefully at home or after a long and noble struggle. It's the disease of poets, artists and tragic children. A slow, graceful exit, provided you don't mind coughing out your lungs and starving to death first. At this point, you might be tempted to hope it's something else, something less permanent. Maybe it's bronchitis, maybe it's the flu, maybe it's just nerves. You try to convince yourself of that. You drink more broth, you walk slower, you open the window for fresh air even though it's winter and your bones already feel like cracked porcelain. But the cough doesn't care, it's patient. And every time you look at the pale stain on your handkerchief, you remember it's not going anywhere. The first thing that really changes is your breathing. You used to be able to climb the stairs without thinking about it. Now you reach the landing with your heart pounding and your lungs heaving like bellows. You wheeze, you pause halfway up. You make excuses. You start avoiding things. The market, the church, the neighbour who always talks too long. The world narrows. You sit more. You rest more. And you lie more too when people ask how you're feeling. You say, just tired and a little under the weather and it'll pass, but it won't. Not really. The second change is in the people around you. They start to notice. At first it's concern, then distance, then suspicion. Consumption is a polite disease. Yes, poetic even. But it's also contagious, and nobody wants to end up like you. You start to see the way they look at your mouth when you speak, as if watching for the next cough. You hear the whispers when you leave the room. You feel the slow withdrawal of touch, the avoidance of shared spoons, the sudden urgency to step back. You're not just sick, you're dangerous now. If you're working class like most people are, there's also the matter of employment. Employers don't like coughing. It's bad for morale, bad for productivity, and very bad for business. One day, you're just another pair of hands on the factory floor. The next, you're a liability. Maybe they let you go gently. More likely, they replace you without a word and tell the others not to get too close. You can't blame them, really. You wouldn't want to work next to someone who might bleed on the product either. You try to find help. A doctor, if you can afford one. A chemist, if you can't. Either way, the advice is the same. Rest, fresh air, and patience. There's no cure, not really. Some doctors swear by cod liver oil. Others recommend sea voyages, mountain air, or long afternoons wrapped in blankets by an open window. If you're lucky, someone might suggest a sanatorium. If you're not, they'll just pat your shoulder and say, "Take it easy." You go home and try to take it easy, which mostly involves lying still and listening to your own breathing, like it's a metronome ticking down the minutes of your life. At night, things get worse. You sleep lightly, if at all. You wake often, choking on phlegm. Your sheets are damp. Your skin feels like paper. The smallest movements make you gasp. You start to keep a bowl near the bed, for the coughing fits, for the blood, for whatever comes up next. Your dreams blur with fever. You hallucinate sometimes. The line between sleep and waking thins, and through it all the cough keeps rhythm, patient, relentless, almost smug. It's your companion now, possibly your only one. Eventually, you stop pretending. There's a moment, and you'll know when it comes, when you stop hoping it's something else, when the blood becomes regular, when your clothes hang off your frame like wet rags, when you catch your reflection and don't recognize the person looking back. That's the real beginning, the point of no return. You don't talk about getting better anymore. You talk about making things comfortable, about arrangements, about time. And just like that, you're not a person with a cold anymore. You're a victim, a case, a cautionary tale in the making. People treat you differently, not cruelly, but distantly, like a candle that's almost out. They speak softer around you, as if loud voices might finish the job. They bring broth and flowers and polite conversations, and then they leave quickly, grateful it isn't them. You're still alive, but already fading. You feel it. You see it in their eyes. Welcome to the beginning of the end. You've coughed your way into history, into the annals of every Victorian medical journal and death record. There's no grand explosion, no cinematic collapse, just a cough that started small and never stopped. This is how it begins, not with a bang, but with a rattle. Let's take a moment to appreciate your surroundings, not because they're pleasant, but because they're actively trying to kill you. Welcome to your corner of Victorian England, a place where industrial progress has outpaced basic human hygiene by about 70 years. You live in a city, probably London, Manchester, or Birmingham, places once described as marvels of modern growth, now more accurately described as overstuffed lungs, wheezing under the weight of coal dust and misery. The buildings rise like soot-stained teeth, packed tight with bodies, vermin, and sorrow. Your street smells like damp brick and last week's chamber pot. The gutters are filled with mud in winter, flies in summer, and human waste year-round. Your home, if you're lucky enough to call it that, is a tenement. You share a single room with several family members, a few stray animals, and possibly someone you're not entirely sure is a cousin, but sleeps in the corner anyway. The walls are thin, cracked, and sweat condensation when it's cold. When it's hot, the air inside becomes a kind of wet oven, thick enough to chew. There is no insulation, no ventilation, certainly no privacy. You breathe the same air as the man 2 floors down, who has also been coughing lately, but with a wheeze that sounds suspiciously familiar. There's a privy at the end of the block, which is generous compared to some places. It serves the entire building, plus whoever else decides to wander in. It is, to put it kindly, unspeakable. You hold your breath when you enter, avoid looking directly at anything, and pray the pit isn't full, though you know it is. Overflow is normal. So is runoff. When it rains, the street outside your door becomes a small river of excrement, garbage, and dead rats. Children play near it, sometimes in it. No one thinks much of it. It's just how things are. If you work in a factory, your day begins before the sun and ends after dark, leaving you no time to notice the world around you unless it's actively on fire. The windows are caked in grime, the machines are loud enough to damage hearing, and the air is a cocktail of smoke, lint, and whatever chemical happens to be in fashion that month. If you're not in a factory, you might be in a textile mill, a bakery, or hauling coal. Or maybe you sweep the streets, which is ironic, because no amount of sweeping will make this place clean. Your lungs have been under siege since birth. As a child, you breathed in factory soot, wood smoke, and the invisible spores of disease drifting from every open mouth on the streetcar. You didn't just live close to your neighbours. You lived on top of them, beneath them, beside them, and sometimes with them, depending on who owed rent that week. Fresh air is a myth, something the upper classes talk about on picnics. Your version of air is thick, grey, and vaguely flammable. Water isn't much better. If you have a pump nearby, that's considered a blessing, though the blessing fades somewhat when you realise the water often runs brown and smells faintly of cabbage and corpse. A surprising number of people upstream have cholera, dysentery, or some unnamed illness that involves explosive symptoms. It's okay though, you boil it when you can afford coal. Otherwise, you drink it and hope for the best. The best rarely happens. You sleep on straw, on wood, or on nothing at all. Your mattress, if you have one, is home to more than just you. Fleas, lice, and bed bugs are your nightly companions. Sometimes when you lie awake, coughing and sweating, you can feel them crawling across your skin. You don't bother scratching anymore. It's a waste of energy, and you need that energy just to breathe. Everything is coated in grime. Your hands are never clean, not really. Your clothes are patched and repatched until they resemble a quilt of past decisions. Bathing is a luxury, and soap is either too expensive or reserved for Sunday. You wash when you must, not when you'd like to. The smell doesn't go away. It just becomes part of the air, like fog or the distant clanging of bells from a funeral procession. Speaking of which, funerals are a regular feature in your neighbourhood. Small black coffins, pale faces under veils, and the smell of cheap flowers trying to cover the scent of decay. Death is not rare. It's routine. Children vanish in the night, old men slump over in alleyways, and women waste away quietly in back rooms while their families argue over bread. Sometimes the dead aren't even removed right away. It's expensive, after all. You might spend a few days sleeping in the same room as someone who's already gone. Not that it changes much. The air was already thick with death. You don't go to the doctor often, if at all. Not just because you can't afford it, but because you don't trust them. The local doctor might also be the local apothecary, dentist, and part-time drunk. His tools aren't clean. His hands aren't clean. His breath smells like gin and regret. You're more likely to get better on your own than by following his advice, which usually includes bloodletting, mustard plasters, or a tonic that's mostly laudanum and wishful thinking. And yet, somehow, this is normal. You've never known anything else. You joke about the rats, you ignore the smell, you step over the sick and nod politely to the ones who still have strength to wave. This is just life, loud, crowded, filthy, and short. You don't expect comfort. You don't expect dignity. You expect to keep breathing until you don't. But for someone with tuberculosis, this environment is more than just unpleasant. It's a death trap. The disease spreads through droplets, a cough, a laugh, a whispered secret too close to someone's ear. And here, where you can't take 3 steps without brushing shoulders, every breath is borrowed. Every shared spoon, Every crowded tram, every communal prayer whispered in a tight church basement is a potential invitation to the end. So you stay indoors more when you can. You open the window a crack, then close it when the neighbour lights his coal stove. You watch the street below, coughing quietly into your sleeve, and wonder which of your neighbours gave this to you, or which one you're going to give it to next. You're not a villain. You didn't choose this, but the city doesn't care. It just keeps moving, breathing, coughing, like one massive diseased lung-pumping smog, and sorrow through every alley and gutter. And you, tucked away in your corner, coughing with the rest of them, can feel it closing in. Not with a bang, but with a wheeze. Eventually your coughing becomes impossible to ignore, even by Victorian standards, which are fairly lenient when it comes to public health. You've wheezed through work, meals and conversations, and now your ribs ache with every breath. The blood in your handkerchief has gone from a rare surprise to a regular feature, and people have stopped asking if you're feeling better. They just glance away when you enter the room. That's when someone suggests you see a doctor, or more accurately, a medical professional of some variety. The lines between doctor, barber, and general neighbourhood enthusiast with a drawer full of knives are blurrier than you'd like. You summon whoever you can afford, which is often a man with mutton chops and a well-worn coat who arrives smelling faintly of gin and pipe smoke. His hands are stained with ink, or blood, or both. He does not bring a bag full of gleaming instruments or a thermometer or, God forbid, a stethoscope. That's cutting-edge stuff, rare and expensive. If he's old-fashioned, he might listen to your chest by pressing his ear directly against your skin. That's the 19th century diagnostic standard, full-body intimacy and wishful thinking. You sit up straight, try not to wheeze too hard, and expose your chest to the damp air. The doctor leans in and listens, occasionally grunting, humming, or tapping thoughtfully. He might ask a few questions. Are you coughing at night? Are you spitting up blood? Do you sweat through the sheets? These are not good signs. He doesn't write anything down. He doesn't need to. He's seen this before, hundreds of times. Thousands, maybe. He gives a little sigh and a nod that says, "Ah, yes, the classic death rattle." Eventually, he stands, clears his throat, and pronounces the word phthisis, a delightful term that sounds like you sneezed into a thistle. It's from the Greek, meaning wasting away, which is both accurate and entirely unhelpful. He might explain that it's an ailment of the lungs, but he won't go into details. Germ theory exists, barely, but it hasn't quite filtered down into practical application. You're not infectious because of bacteria. You're delicate, or maybe melancholic, possibly cursed. It depends on who you ask. If you're lucky, he won't blame you outright. Victorian medicine has a habit of tying illness to morality. You might be told that your constitution is weak, that you're too sensitive, too poetic, too emotional. For women, it's often linked to hysteria. For men, it might be described as the result of dissipation, which is a polite way of saying you stayed up too late or had too many unwholesome thoughts. Either way, you're not just sick, you're suspect. He prescribes rest, of course, and fresh air, lots of it. Maybe a change of scenery, a trip to the seaside if you're well off, a sanitarium in the country if you're extremely well off. But for you, he suggests opening a window and sitting in the sun for an hour a day. You look out the window at the brick wall 3 feet away and try not to laugh. He also recommends a tonic, something with quinine or arsenic or opium, possibly all three. If he's trendy, he might even mention hydrotherapy. Being doused with buckets of cold water at regular intervals, which somehow is supposed to help your lungs. Then come the dietary suggestions. Eat well, he says. Rich foods, nourishing broths, lots of milk. Never mind that you're too poor to afford meat more than once a week, and milk spoils faster than you can drink it. You nod politely and think about the heel of stale bread waiting at home. There's also the suggestion to avoid stress. as if the constant fear of suffocating to death in your own lungs isn't enough of a mental burden. Before he leaves, he might suggest one final measure: isolation. For your health, of course, and to protect others. He says this gently, as if exiling you to your room is a kindness. He doesn't say quarantine, because that sounds too official. But the message is clear. Fewer people around you means fewer people watching you decline, and fewer people to blame when they catch it next. He accepts payment in coins, goods, or silence, and then he's gone, off to visit another patient, or to the pub, or possibly both. You sit in your chair, lungs rattling softly, staring at the window that doesn't open, and trying to decide whether today's diagnosis was a formality or just a professional way of saying start preparing to die. No one has used the word curable. No one ever does. You try to follow his advice. You open the window, breathe the soot, sip the tonic. It burns going down and makes your tongue go numb. That's probably the arsenic, or the opium. Hard to tell. You lie in bed and listen to the city outside. Horses clattering over cobblestones, children shouting, a distant church bell tolling for someone else's funeral. You imagine someone doing the same for you soon. You wonder how many people have been through this same routine. How many chest examinations and Greek words and useless tonics. You wonder if the doctor really believed any of it, or if he just didn't have the heart to say, "You're dying slowly and spectacularly, and we can't stop it." You wouldn't blame him. It's a hard truth to deliver. Much easier to mumble something in Latin and leave a bottle of coloured liquid on the table. Later that evening, someone asks what the doctor said. You repeat the word, phthisis, and try to sound nonchalant. They nod gravely, as if it confirms something they already suspected. No one is shocked. This disease doesn't make grand entrances. It creeps in, takes root, and slowly peels you apart from the inside out. Everyone's seen it before. The rest of the day passes in a haze. The cough returns, worse now, as if resentful of being examined. You lie down and watch the ceiling. You trace the cracks with your eyes and wonder how long you have. A few months? A year? Maybe 2 if your lungs are especially stubborn. Outside, the sky turns the colour of ash. Someone's burning coal. You take a deep breath, out of habit, and instantly regret it. So that's it. You've seen the doctor. You have your diagnosis. There will be no dramatic interventions, no miracle drugs, no sudden recoveries, just time and not much of it. A slow unravelling, the kind that makes people whisper your name and stop visiting. You're no longer just sick. You're one of them now. One of the consumptives, elegant in death, ignored in life, and quietly rotting from the inside out. Now that you've been formally diagnosed with a terminal lung condition and politely dismissed back into the waiting arms of your deathbed, it's time to address the next logical step: treatment. Not a cure, mind you. No one's offering one of those. Cures are for things like ringworm or broken bones. You, on the other hand, have tuberculosis, a disease so deeply rooted in Victorian society that it's practically a lifestyle. And so, the treatments you're offered aren't really meant to heal you. They're meant to give the illusion that something is being done. A series of slow, expensive distractions until your lungs finally call it quits. The first and most fashionable remedy is laudanum, a delightful little potion that combines alcohol with opium in quantities generous enough to make your teeth hum. Laudanum is prescribed for everything from headaches to hysteria to existential dread. So it's no surprise they offer it for tuberculosis too. A few drops in water, they say, and you'll feel better. Which is true, in the sense that you'll feel nothing. It dulls the pain, yes, but it also dulls your ability to stand, focus, or form a coherent sentence. You're now both sick and high, floating through your final days like a ghost with a mild opium dependency. Next on the list is mercury, the element of choice for doctors who think subtlety is for cowards. Mercury has been used for centuries as a medicine, despite the minor issue of being extremely toxic. The idea is that it purges the body, which is to say, it causes violent sweating, vomiting, and occasionally death by organ failure. It doesn't target the tuberculosis, of course. It just makes everything else feel so awful that you forget your lungs are rotting, your gums swell, your teeth loosen, your breath smells like metal and regret. But hey, at least you're being proactive. Then there's the cod liver oil, a favourite among those who still believe in restorative tonics. Thick, fishy, and unreasonably warm. This concoction is poured down your throat with the solemn hope that it'll add bulk to your wasting frame. It doesn't. What it does is linger in your mouth, your throat, and your nightmares. It makes you gag and then you cough, and then you bleed a little more. But the Victorians love it. It's a symbol of discipline, of doing the unpleasant thing because it's good for you. Which in this case means enduring mild nausea while dying at the same pace. Fresh air is another cornerstone of your recovery plan. Doctors and neighbours alike insist it's the most important thing. Clean, bracing country air, far from the choking fog of the city. Ideally, you'd be sent to a sanitarium nestled in the hills, where you could recline on a veranda in a wool blanket, while birds chirp politely and the staff whisper about your prognosis. But unless you've got money, connections, or a very generous relative, your version of fresh air involves cracking open the one window in your tenement and inhaling the neighbour's chimney smoke. It's a nice idea, just not a useful one. Now we move into the more creative territory, remedies that toe the line between enthusiastic guesswork and outright punishment. Bloodletting, for instance, is still in fashion with the more medieval-minded physicians. They believe your body is imbalanced, full of bad humours, and the best way to fix that is to drain you like a pig at a harvest festival. A few leeches on the chest, a shallow cut on the arm, and a bowl to catch the evidence. You feel weaker afterward, which they interpret as a sign that it's working. Vinegar inhalation is another popular choice. The idea is simple. If your lungs are diseased, just fumigate them. You boil vinegar, hold a towel over your head, and breathe in the acrid steam until your eyes water and your chest burns. It doesn't cure anything, but it does clear your sinuses and make your room smell like a cursed salad. It's also a nice distraction from the constant sensation of drowning in your own body fluids. Things get stranger the further you go down the social ladder. Desperation breeds innovation and superstition. You might be encouraged to drink cow urine on the grounds that it's pure and restorative, or you might be offered a tonic made from crushed snails, burnt feathers, or powdered frogs. Some swear by wearing a dead toad in a pouch around your neck. Others recommend burning sulphur under your bed to chase away the evil spirits, though it mostly just chases away the oxygen. And of course there are the herbalists and travelling quacks, hawking elixirs that claim to cure everything from baldness to heartbreak. Their bottles are filled with alcohol, opium, turpentine, and occasionally something that glows in the dark. They promise miracles, they offer hope, they take your money, you drink what they give you, feel euphoric for an hour, then vomit violently into a basin and sleep for 2 days. It's not treatment, it's a form of theatre, a ritual of pretending you're doing something, even if it's killing you faster. You try them all, because what else can you do? There are no antibiotics, no x-rays, no surgery that doesn't involve a hacksaw and a strong stomach. Every remedy is a shot in the dark, and you are the target. The only consistent result is that you keep coughing, keep wasting away, and keep hoping that maybe the next bizarre concoction will be the one that works. Your family supports you as best they can. They spoon you broth. They measure out doses. They adjust your pillows and fan your face and try to smile through the smell of rotting lungs and herbal compresses. They don't say what you're all thinking, that none of this is helping, that you're going to die in spite of the treatments, not because you didn't try hard enough. In the end, your shelf becomes a graveyard of remedies, Stained bottles, half-used poultices, instructions scrawled in fading ink. You have become a walking experiment in medical optimism, a human scrapbook of every false promise the 19th century has to offer. And yet, you keep going, because the alternative is silence. And silence means the end. So you drink the cod liver oil, you inhale the vinegar, you swallow the laudanum and let it blur the edges of your mind until the world becomes quiet and slow and mercifully distant. You lie back, eyes half closed, and let the cough carry on without you. It's winning. It always was. But at least you can say you tried, even if all you really did was die slightly more expensively. You're thin now, dramatically so. Your clothes hang off you like they've been borrowed from a taller, healthier stranger. Bones that once stayed politely hidden beneath skin now announce themselves with every movement. Your collarbone, your ribs, even the fragile scaffolding of your hands. They all seem eager to be noticed, as if your skeleton is trying to beat your soul out the door. Your reflection has changed. Your face is longer, sharper. Your eyes, once ordinary, now look enormous in their sockets, framed by circles so dark they seem to have been painted on. You don't look sick, you look haunted. This, oddly enough, is when people start romanticizing you. The very same neighbours who flinched when you coughed now describe you with words like ethereal and fragile. Your decline has become aesthetically pleasing. There's something deeply Victorian about that, turning a slow death into a kind of tragic art. You've become the subject of whispered admiration. People murmur things like wasting beautifully or fading like a flower, which is just a genteel way of saying you resemble a ghost who forgot to finish dying. If you were well enough to laugh, you might find that funny, but laughter costs breath, and breath is a luxury you can't spare. The Victorians love a good death, especially a slow poetic one. Consumption is ideal. It doesn't disfigure, at least not right away. It doesn't scream or smell too soon. It lingers. It gives people time to compose poems about you, sketch your profile in the soft light of the sick room, and sigh wistfully as you struggle to sit upright. In a society obsessed with manners, even your dying must be graceful. No thrashing, no weeping, just a quiet fade like a candle sputtering out. You begin to notice how people speak differently around you now. Their voices soften, as though volume itself might damage you further. They ask how you're feeling, but they don't want an honest answer. They want you to say, a bit better today, even if you're visibly closer to death than you were yesterday. They bring gifts, books you're too tired to read, food you can't eat, flowers that smell too strong. Their visits are short and full of pauses. They look at you like you're already halfway gone, which, to be fair, you are. Your appetite is mostly theoretical these days. You nibble, sip, pick at things. You're not hungry, not really. The body has moved past wanting. You eat because people ask you to, because it makes them feel better. You taste everything through a haze. Salt, iron, the faint bitterness of spoiled milk. Sometimes you eat and immediately regret it. Other times, you just move the food around your plate until someone takes it away. Sleep comes in fragments. You drift, doze, slip into fevered half-dreams. You wake often, to cough, to adjust your aching limbs, to catch your breath. Nights are longer now, not in hours but in sensation. They stretch and sag like time itself is decaying. The silence presses in, broken only by your own wheezing. Sometimes you count the seconds between coughs, as if measuring your distance from the inevitable. Your bed becomes a kind of island. You live in it now. You move from one position to another with the slow determination of someone trying not to shatter. Pillows are arranged and rearranged, blankets added, then removed. The mattress has shaped itself to your form, a shallow impression like a fossil in progress. The room itself shrinks. The walls creep closer. The window, once a source of interest, becomes just another square of dull grey sky you're too tired to stare at for long. Hygiene becomes optional. Washing takes effort. You sponge off what you can when you can, but there are days, many of them, when even that's too much. Your hair thins and tangles. Your breath smells of decay, though no one says so. Your skin is dry and cool, dotted with bruises from coughing fits, from being moved too roughly, from existing. There's a particular look to consumptives, a certain glow that people talk about as though it's beautiful. It's not. It's your body burning through itself in slow motion. Some days you try to get up. You swing your legs over the edge of the bed and sit there, swaying slightly, catching your breath before attempting to stand. Sometimes you make it. Sometimes you don't. The floor is hard. The coughing fits come quickly, bending you in half, draining the colour from your face. The effort costs more than it gives. Eventually, you stop trying. Conversations drift past you. People talk around you more than to you. You become part of the furniture, a fixture in the room, quietly disintegrating. When they do speak directly to you, it's often in soft, careful tones, like they're afraid to startle you out of your body. They ask about your comforts. They fluff your pillows. They avoid mentioning anything that involves the future. No one says the word dying. It's implied. It hangs in the air with the dust and the scent of camphor. You begin to lose time. Days blur. Mornings and evenings bleed together in a haze of coughing, sleeping, and blinking at the ceiling. People come and go. Sometimes you forget their names. Sometimes you forget your own. There are stretches of blankness, of dreams that feel like memories and memories that feel like someone else's life. Your body is still here, but you're beginning to drift. You hover in your skin like a passenger who knows the train is nearly at its final stop. And yet, somehow, you're still considered lucky. Lucky to be dying gently. Lucky to be at home. Lucky to be interesting enough for people to stop and sigh and wonder aloud how someone so young and sensitive could be taken so soon. They don't see the sores in your mouth, the blood in your throat, the nights you spend wondering if the next breath will be your last. They see a beautiful tragedy, wrapped in blankets and backlit by candlelight. You've become a story, a symbol, a lesson. Everyone loves a good death, as long as it isn't theirs. So you lie still. You listen to the clock ticking on the mantel, to the faint rustling of skirts, to your own shallow breathing. You are fading, slowly and beautifully, like a proper Victorian consumptive. And everyone around you is so moved by how graceful you are about it that they forget, entirely, to be afraid of how it might feel. But you know, you feel every inch of it. And it's not beautiful. It's not poetic. It's just the sound of your body giving up. One quiet breath at a time. It would be nice to believe that falling ill earns you some sympathy, that the people around you, having watched your body fail by degrees, might respond with care or concern. But this is Victorian England, where illness isn't just an unfortunate twist of fate, it's a moral verdict. To be sick is to be suspect. It means something, they say. It reflects who you are. And when your disease is consumption, the message is very clear. You brought this on yourself. At first, the judgment is subtle, a glance that lingers too long, a quiet conversation that stops when you enter the room. People start suggesting causes, not medical ones, but character flaws. You've always been a bit sensitive, haven't you? A little melancholic, prone to worry. Perhaps you didn't get enough sun. Perhaps you think too much. There's even talk that you read too often, that books overstimulate the mind, weaken the nerves, and disturb the vital balance of the body. You're sick because you are, in some essential way, fragile, or worse, flawed. There's a long list of reasons your illness might be your fault. For women, the list starts with hysteria and ends with too much emotion. You were too excitable, too romantic, too willful. You indulged your feelings instead of suppressing them. You let grief or desire or poetry loosen the structure of your lungs. Your femininity has betrayed you, as it always does in polite society. For men, it's a question of discipline. Were you idle, irresponsible? Did you drink too much, stay out too late, skip church? Perhaps you failed to live with the stern resolve expected of your gender. Maybe the disease is God's way of reminding you how a proper man behaves. The whispers are everywhere, and they're not always behind your back. People say things aloud in your presence as if the judgment is part of your care. They don't say you're dying. They say you're being punished for what? That's up for interpretation, but the subtext is consistent. If you had lived differently, this wouldn't be happening. And if it is happening, then maybe it's what you deserve. Even your family begins to treat you differently. At first, they were attentive, but as the weeks drag on and your symptoms worsen, their patience thins. Your care costs money, time, labour. You're not contributing, you're a weight they're forced to carry. Some days they don't speak to you at all. Other days, they try to motivate you, which is to say, they accuse you of giving up. You should try harder, be stronger, think positively. Never mind the fact that your lungs are collapsing and your bones are showing through your skin. Dying gracefully is hard enough. Dying while pretending you're not is harder. Worse still, the doctors, the few who still bother visiting, often reinforce the idea that your health is a reflection of your character. They describe you as delicate, moody, or constitutionally unsound. These aren't clinical terms. They're insults dressed in polite vocabulary. No one says tuberculosis is just a disease. They say it's a symptom of something deeper, some spiritual or psychological failure. It's not enough to be sick, you also have to be wrong. Eventually, the external judgment turns inward. You start to believe it. Maybe it is your fault. You think about every choice you made, every skipped chore, every moment of weakness, every time you sat by the window, reading instead of taking a brisk walk. Maybe that was the moment the disease crept in. Maybe you invited it. Maybe, deep down, you wanted this, the attention, the drama, the excuse to stop trying so hard. It's a poisonous thought, but it's persistent. And in your weakened state, it finds fertile ground. You try to push it away. You remind yourself that this illness doesn't discriminate, that rich and poor alike have fallen to it, that children have died younger than you. But then you remember how the wealthy are allowed to die in comfort, surrounded by soft things and sentimental poetry, while you cough up your lungs in a drafty room with a blanket that smells like mildew. You don't have the kind of death that earns sympathy. You have the kind people are eager to forget, and forget they do. Friends stop visiting, acquaintances cross the street to avoid you. Employers pretend they never knew you. Even the church, which preaches compassion, seems to treat you like a cautionary tale. Your name disappears from conversations. You are not remembered for who you were, but for the awkward, unpleasant thing you became. You are the ghost before the grave, the shame that coughs in the corner. There are moments, brief, flickering moments, when someone reaches out. A neighbour who brings broth. A child who sits beside you and doesn't flinch. These kindnesses matter, but they are rare and they are fragile. They are overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the silence around you, the unspoken belief that you failed in some essential way. What no one says out loud, what they can't quite admit, even to themselves, is that blaming you makes them feel safer. If your disease is your fault, then they don't have to worry. They don't have to fear the random cruelty of infection. They don't have to imagine that a simple cough might kill them. If you earned your fate, then they can avoid it by behaving better. And so they create a story. You were weak, or sinful, or unwise, and now you are dying, and it is sad, but also, somehow, appropriate. You want to scream, but that would take more air than you can spare. So you lie there, breathing shallowly, listening to the silence between visits. You have become both symbol and scapegoat, a vessel for other people's fears, an object lesson in how not to live, despite the fact that, really, you didn't do anything at all, and somewhere in that haze of guilt and phlegm, you begin to disappear. Not all at once, just a little each day. You stop correcting people. You stop expecting anything better. You let the shame settle into your bones alongside the sickness. And in doing so, you fulfill the story they've written for you. The one where you slip away quietly, tragically, and most importantly, without complaint. Being sick doesn't excuse you from working. Not here, not now. In Victorian England, productivity is considered a virtue second only to piety. Whether you're coughing up blood or dragging your feet like a ghost in boots, you're still expected to show up and contribute to the factory, the household, the workshop, the street corner. There's no sick leave, no medical accommodation, no helpful HR department suggesting you take time to rest and recover. You work until you can't, and then you don't. And once you don't, you're on your own. At first, you try to keep going. Maybe you drag yourself to the mill, bent over like a broken hinge, hoping no one notices the blood on your handkerchief, or the way you have to lean against the wall every few minutes just to stay upright. You move slower now, and your breath is shorter, but as long as you can still lift something, or turn something, or sweep something, you're useful. That's the only metric that matters. Not how sick you are, not how close to death, just whether you can still perform your function. But tuberculosis doesn't pause just because you have bills to pay. Your limbs weaken, your spine feels hollow, your head throbs constantly from the effort of staying vertical. Your hands tremble. Your coughing fits interrupt the rhythm of the machines, draw attention, slow down the line. The foreman frowns. Co-workers step further away. Everyone's afraid of catching what you've got, but no one says it aloud. They don't have to. The space around you grows wider by the day. And then one morning, you simply can't get up. Or maybe you do, but halfway to the door, the world tilts, and you're on your knees, retching and wheezing into your sleeves. That's it. You're done. Being let go is not dramatic. There's no farewell speech, no gesture of sympathy. You're told simply that your position is no longer needed, or that it's been filled by someone who can stand upright without bleeding. You leave with whatever belongings you had at your workstation, and a silence that clings to you like coal dust. You're not just unemployed, you're forgotten. Now you face a problem with no solution. You're too sick to work, but you still need to eat. Rent still needs to be paid. Medicine still costs money, even if it doesn't work. Maybe your family can help, but maybe they can't. Maybe they're just as poor, just as close to collapse, and your continued presence is less an inspiration and more a logistical burden. You start selling what you can: a pair of boots, a coat, your mother's candlesticks. Eventually the room feels empty, and you still haven't covered the rent. There are charities technically, almshouses, church boxes, the occasional sympathetic neighbour, but they can only stretch so far, and pity has a short shelf life. After a few weeks, even the kindest people get tired of giving to someone who just keeps getting worse. The hunger sets in slowly. First it's just smaller portions, then it's skipping meals, then it's chewing stale crusts and pretending you're full so others won't worry. Your stomach stops rumbling after a while. It figures out there's no point in complaining. Eventually, if you're truly out of options, you're sent to the workhouse. That sounds like it might involve work and a house, but the name is misleading on both counts. It is not a house, it is a prison, without bars, a bureaucratic graveyard where the poor are stored until they die or vanish from the records. The work you do there is mostly meaningless. Stone breaking, oakum picking, scrubbing the same floor until your fingers blister and your joints lock. It isn't designed to help you recover. It's designed to make you feel ashamed of needing help in the first place. Upon arrival, you're stripped, searched, and deloused. Your clothes are taken, your name entered into a ledger, your identity reduced to a number, in an overcrowded system. Men and women are separated. Families are split. Children are kept in different quarters. The rooms are cold. The beds are hard. The food is exactly what you'd expect from a government-run institution, trying not to seem too charitable. Gruel mostly. Maybe some bread. If you're lucky, a slice of something pretending to be meat on Sundays. There is no privacy in the workhouse, no dignity either. You're watched constantly, laughed at, pitied, ignored. You sleep in a shared room with strangers who cough as much as you do, some louder, some quieter, some no longer moving at all. The smell is an unholy combination of mildew, sickness, and resignation. People die in their bunks all the time. Sometimes no one notices for hours. And yet, this is still considered a rescue. You have a roof over your head. You're not on the street. You're not starving quite as quickly. This is what passes for mercy. Slow motion death with institutional oversight. You can't leave easily, but then again, you don't have anywhere to go. No one's waiting for you. No one's coming to check if you're all right. You've entered a kind of administrative purgatory, one step above a pauper's grave. You think about the life you had before, meagre as it was, the job, the routine, the little comforts, the tea, the chair by the fire, the way people used to say your name without a note of pity. You were poor then, yes, but you were yours. Now you belong to the system, and the system does not care if you live or die as long as you stay quiet and don't make too much trouble on the way out. There's a bitter irony to all of this. Tuberculosis is often described as a romantic disease, especially in the upper classes. They write poetry about it, paint pale women in bed with wistful smiles, frame the slow wasting as something beautiful. But for people like you, poor nameless, coughing blood onto borrowed sheets, there is nothing elegant about it. It's just a long, cold, hungry descent, watched over by bored clerks and indifferent nurses. And when you finally die, and you will, your body will be wrapped, tagged, and disposed of with efficient indifference. A note might go in the register. A number might be added to a chart. If someone remembers your name a week later, it will be a minor miracle. You worked until you couldn't, and then you starved, quietly, politely, as expected. There's a rumour, whispered with cautious hope, that if you're lucky, or at least middle class enough to fake it convincingly, you might be sent to a sanitarium. Not a hospital, not quite a hospice, but something between a retreat and a holding pen for people expected to die, slowly and tastefully. The word itself sounds clean, doesn't it? Sanitarium. Like sanitization, like health. You picture wide halls, white linens, kindly nurses with warm hands and cooler voices. A place where you might have a chance to breathe a little easier. That illusion won't last long. The building is usually situated on a hill, elevated, remote, surrounded by trees or mist or endless fields. It looks peaceful from a distance, maybe even noble, like a manor converted for the ill and fragile. But when you arrive, wheezing into a borrowed handkerchief and trying not to pass out at the front step, you realise it's not a place for healing. It's a place for waiting. The corridors are long and draughty. The ceiling's high and echoing. Everything smells faintly of carbolic acid and boiled cabbage. You're shown to a narrow bed in a shared room with 4 other people, each with their own cough, their own collection of stains on the pillow, their own slow countdown. Your daily routine is structured, because structure is thought to be therapeutic. You wake early, whether you've slept or not, and are dressed in layers and blankets and wheeled or walked outside to sit in the fresh air. It doesn't matter if it's raining, snowing, or cold enough to freeze the phlegm in your lungs. Outdoor air is the prescribed cure. Rows of fragile people are lined up in long deck chairs on the porch, bundled like corpses on display, their heads tilted back to the sky. Some read, some nap, some just stare. It's quiet, aside from the ever-present background music of coughing. The doctors here are polite but distant. They perform examinations with the studied detachment of someone inspecting furniture. They take notes. They mutter to each other. They listen to your chest and make marks on a chart, but they rarely speak to you directly in anything more than gentle suggestions. More broth, less exertion. Keep breathing deeply. They avoid the word terminal. Instead, they call it advanced or persistent or uncooperative. It doesn't change the prognosis, but it sounds nicer when written in the logbook. Meals are simple and repetitive. Boiled meats, milk, weak tea, and grey porridge that defies classification. You're encouraged to eat as much as you can, as if food might rebuild your lungs from the inside out. You try, you chew, you swallow, but food tastes like ash now, and your throat hurts too much to enjoy anything that isn't liquid. Sometimes you get a little brandy to help you sleep, or to dull the edge of a particularly awful day. They call it tonic, but everyone knows it's consolation in a glass. There are therapies too, if you can call them that. Hydrotherapy, which is a noble term for being dunked in freezing water and wrapped in wet sheets. Inhalation rooms, where you sit and breathe steam infused with herbs, vinegar, or camphor until your lungs burn or your nose runs uncontrollably. Sometimes they use UV light, thinking that artificial sunlight might kill whatever darkness lives inside your chest. Mostly, though, you just sit, day after day, in a chair, in a bed, on the porch, waiting. The other patients are at various stages of decline. Some have only just arrived and still speak in full sentences. Others have been here so long that they've become part of the furniture, barely moving, eyes sunken into pale sockets. You see yourself reflected in each of them, a progression, a grim little timeline. You wonder which one you resemble to others. You try not to think about which one you'll become. Letters come from home sometimes, visits less often. Your family might send a parcel, a pair of socks, a bit of fruit, a prayer card, but mostly you're alone. No one wants to spend too much time in a place that feels like death with curtains. Visitors leave quickly, uncomfortable with the smell, the silence, the look in the eyes of people who know exactly how this ends. You get used to it. You learn to fold your loneliness neatly, tuck it beneath the blanket, and keep your voice cheerful when someone asks how you're feeling. Occasionally, someone disappears. Their bed is stripped, their name removed from the chart. No one speaks about it, but everyone notices. The staff is quiet that day, a little more efficient than usual. You glance at the empty space where their chair once sat on the veranda. It's filled the next day. Always is. There's never a shortage of patients. Some people pretend they're getting better. They smile a little wider. They talk about future plans, a holiday, a return to work. You don't judge them. You understand the need for something to cling to, even if the chances of leaving this place vertically are vanishingly small. The sanitarium doesn't advertise its death rate, but everyone here knows the numbers. For most, this isn't a hospital. It's a terminal lounge. The worst part isn't the pain. You're used to that. It's the liminality, the constant hovering between life and death. You're not dead, but you're not really alive either. You're not improving, but you're not sick enough to be buried. You exist in the margins, where time passes slowly and nothing ever changes except the name on the empty bed. You are part of a grim procession that marches in place. There's a final irony here, of course. Sanitariums were meant to offer hope, a step above the workhouse, a civilized institution where disease was managed with discipline and decorum, but hope doesn't live here. It chokes quietly beneath the weight of protocol and polite resignation. You realize it one afternoon, sitting in your deck chair, watching the grey clouds drift overhead. A cold wind rattles your bones. You shiver, pull the blanket tighter, and cough into your handkerchief. Red again. No one looks at you. No one reacts. This too is part of the scenery. Just another patient. Just another chair. Just another day in the place where people come to almost live, and then quietly, inevitably, don't. Time slows down. Not in a poetic or meditative way, but in the way that minutes begin to feel like hours and each day becomes an echo of the last. Your world contracts to a handful of square feet. The bed, the chair, the small table cluttered with bottles, rags, and the occasional spoonful of something you won't finish. You no longer walk, not because you don't want to, but because your legs have become unreliable. They don't support your weight so much as they delay your fall. When you move, it's a shuffle, a hesitant, dragging motion that requires calculation and courage. You inch between places like a ghost that hasn't quite let go. Eating becomes symbolic more than nutritional. Meals are served, but you don't really eat them. You take a sip here, a small bite there. Broth goes cold before you can finish half of it. Bread sits untouched. The idea of food exhausts you. Even when your stomach rumbles, your body refuses. Swallowing is a chore, and everything tastes like metal or nothing at all. People still bring you things, fruit, puddings, bits of meat. But you can't do much with them except nod politely and watch them be taken away again, untouched. Your lungs have become your captors. Once they were your life support, pulling in the world and exhaling it back out. Now they are caves of rot, hollowed out by disease, filled with fluid and filth. Breathing is no longer automatic. You have to work at it, slowly, consciously. Each breath rattles like wind through broken shutters. Every exhale is an effort. You wheeze, you choke. You cough up more than just phlegm now. Little bits of blood, sometimes tissue. Your handkerchiefs are no longer white, but patterned with fading, rust-coloured stains that you no longer bother hiding. Nights are the worst. You doze in intervals, waking up drenched in sweat, or in the middle of a coughing fit that leaves your chest heaving and your throat raw. Your sheets stick to you. Your nightclothes cling, damp with fever. You hear the sounds of the building, people shifting, nurses padding by in soft shoes, someone sobbing 2 rooms down. The clock ticks endlessly. Sleep, when it comes, is thin and fevered. You dream of drowning, of burning, of being swallowed by fog. You wake just as tired as you were when you drifted off. Your body has become a stranger. It smells different, sour, metallic, heavy. Your limbs ache constantly, not sharply, but in a dull, oppressive way that makes everything feel harder than it should be. Bruises form and never really fade. Your mouth is often dry, cracked, or coated with an unpleasant film that makes speaking uncomfortable. You've stopped asking for a mirror. You don't want to see what you look like. You already know. People don't speak to you as much anymore. They speak around you, above you, in hushed tones near the door. You catch phrases like fading fast or poor thing. Sometimes someone sits beside you and talks about the weather, or something they saw in the paper, or what so-and-so wore to church. You nod when you can, but it's hard to keep up. Your mind is slowing down, not because you're losing your wits, but because it takes so much energy just to be present. Words blur, faces blend. You remember things in flashes, snippets of songs, smells from childhood, names that float to the surface and then vanish again. You begin to think about the end, not abstractly, but practically. How it might happen. Whether it'll come during the night or while you're alone. Whether it will be quick, unlikely, or slow. Much more probable. Some people say it's like falling asleep, that the body just shuts down. But you know better. You've felt what it's like to suffocate by inches, to cough until your vision goes white at the edges, to gasp like a fish on a dry riverbank. If death is peaceful, it's only because by the time it comes, you have nothing left to resist it. Sometimes the staff tries to be cheerful. They open the curtains in the morning and comment on the light. They fluff pillows. They adjust your blankets. They ask if you want tea or broth or a story. You appreciate the effort, but you can tell it's for them, not for you. They've seen this before. They know where you are on the timeline. Their kindness is edged with distance. They won't get too close. You're already slipping out of reach. You stop keeping track of the date. The calendar means nothing now. Sundays are like Thursdays. You mark time in breaths, in coughs, in the sound of someone else being wheeled down the corridor. You no longer ask how long it's been or how much longer you have. There's no point. The answer is always the same. A little longer than yesterday, but not by much. Sometimes people still visit. A family member, a friend. They stand awkwardly at the edge of your bed, holding your hand like it's a fragile artifact. They try to smile. They say things like, "You're looking better," even though you're clearly not. You nod, you thank them, you let them pretend. It's easier that way. Occasionally, one of them cries. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with quiet dignity. You reach for them if you can, and if not, you just lie there and let them cry. You both know what's coming. There's no need to say it. There's a strange stillness to this stage of dying. Not peace exactly, but a kind of resigned quiet. You stop struggling. You stop hoping. Not because you've given up, but because there's nothing left to hope for. This is it. This is the end. The disease has taken almost everything. Your strength, your appetite, your voice, your future, and it's just finishing up with the last scraps now. All that remains is you, lying in a narrow bed, surrounded by the echo of fading footsteps and the smell of camphor. And so you wait. Not passively, but with the full, aching weight of awareness. You wait as your hands grow colder. You wait as your breath gets shallower. You wait as your thoughts drift further apart, like leaves in a current. The end isn't dramatic. It's not thunderclaps or final speeches. It's the slow slipping away, unnoticed by the world outside, but unmistakable to everyone still listening. Tuberculosis doesn't just kill you. It takes its time. It wears you down layer by layer, piece by piece, until you're not quite sure where your body ends and the disease begins. It doesn't charge in like a fever or strike like a heart attack. No, it dismantles softly, carefully, almost politely, as if it wants to give everyone around you time to get used to the idea of you not being here anymore. And then just when you're down to your last thread of breath, it pulls that away too. The end isn't a moment, it's a process. And that process begins when your lungs stop being lungs and start being buckets. Buckets that fill slowly with fluid, every hour a little more. You can feel it when you lie down. A strange heaviness, a sloshing tightness in your chest, like you're trying to breathe underwater. Each breath becomes shallower than the last. Not because you want it to be, but because your lungs simply have no more room. Air goes in, but it doesn't stay. You can't hold it. You try to cough it free, but there's no strength left to do more than wheeze. You don't gasp, not at first. It's subtler than that. You feel like someone's tied a thick scarf around your chest and started pulling slowly. Not hard enough to crush you, just enough to keep you constantly aware that you're no longer in control of your own breathing. You start to panic quietly. Not the kind of panic that makes you thrash and scream. Those require too much energy, but the quiet, desperate kind that lives behind your eyes and clenches in your gut. You stare at the ceiling, breathing through your mouth, hoping each inhalation will be deeper than the last. It never is. By now, you're not speaking. You haven't spoken in hours, maybe longer. Talking uses too much oxygen. Even blinking feels like a choice you have to weigh. The room buzzes with silence. You hear everything. The scrape of a chair, the drip of a leaky pipe, the muffled shuffle of someone walking past your door. These sounds feel far away, like they belong to a world you're no longer part of. You're aware of your surroundings, but only distantly, as if observing them through a thin sheet of ice. The people around you don't quite know what to do. They stand near your bed, watching, waiting. They ask if you're comfortable, though they know you're not. They wipe your forehead with damp cloths. They whisper your name like it's a spell. They look for signs, an improvement, a change, a last-minute turn that won't come. No one says the word dying. It doesn't have to be said. It's there in every shallow breath, every second that passes without motion. You are slowly dissolving in front of them, and they can't look away. At some point, your lungs stop bothering with rhythm. Breathing becomes irregular, inconsistent. There's a pause between breaths that lasts a second longer than it should. Then another. Then another. Sometimes your body jolts forward in a sudden, involuntary attempt to suck in air. Other times, it just doesn't. You breathe in and nothing happens. No air, no relief. Just the crushing pressure of everything inside you being too full of everything you don't need. Fluid, blood, decay. You aren't in pain exactly. Not in the way people fear pain. You're too far gone for that now. But you're aware. That's the horror of it. You're lucid. You know what's happening. You feel yourself slipping. You hear your own breathing, wet, ragged, unnatural. You feel the sticky weight in your chest. You know that death is no longer in the distance. It's here. It's just being methodical. At the very end, your world narrows down to nothing but sensation. The feel of your own skin, the weight of the blanket, the taste of blood in your mouth, the desperate instinct to inhale, even when your body refuses to cooperate. You don't see visions. You don't hear angels. You hear your lungs failing like broken bellows. You hear the death rattle, your own, and realize you've become the sound that people fear behind closed doors. And then something gives. It might be your chest. It might be your heart. It might be your will. There's no announcement, no cinematic finale, just the moment when your body no longer even tries. The breath doesn't come. The handkerchief falls. The room goes still. The people beside you know. Not because of anything you do, but because of what you don't do. You stop moving. You stop shifting. The effort is over. They wait a moment, maybe two. Someone places a hand near your mouth. No breath, no warmth, just silence. Someone else begins to cry, quietly, out of habit more than grief. By the time a doctor is summoned, your skin is already going cold. You don't leave behind much. A bed, a small stack of letters, a few stained garments. Your name will be written in a ledger, maybe spoken softly in church. And then you'll be reduced to memory, and then, slowly, to nothing. Tuberculosis doesn't give its victims grand exits, just slow, quiet departures, like smoke escaping a chimney, vanishing into the sky before anyone can trace where it came from. That's how it ends. Not with a scream, not with a bang, but with a long, wet sigh. A breath that never makes it back out. You drown, inch by inch, in your own failing lungs, and the world doesn't stop. The sky stays grey. The corridor hums with other lives continuing. The nurses clean the sheets. The bed is changed. And by evening, someone else will be coughing in that same spot. You're finally dead. But the Victorians aren't done with you yet. If you are hoping for peace, silence, or even a discreet burial, you've misjudged the cultural moment. Death in this era isn't a private affair. It's a full production. A ritual, a social obligation, and, most disturbingly, a form of art. You are no longer a person. You are a project. And your body, even in death, must perform its final duties with decorum and photogenic stillness. The first thing they do is wash you. Not out of hygiene, really, but out of symbolism. Cleansing the body before burial is a gesture, a way to make you presentable, not just for the funeral, but for what comes before it. You're stripped, sponged, and gently arranged. Your limbs bent back into the suggestion of grace. Rigor mortis is uncooperative, but there are ways to work around it. Towels, straps, a bit of force. You are powdered, combed, sometimes even painted, cheeks rouged, lips dabbed with a tint to give the illusion of life. Death is allowed, but only if it looks nice. Then you're dressed. Not in a hospital gown or burial shroud, but in your Sunday best, or the closest approximation your family can manage. A lace collar, a buttoned waistcoat, a brooch, maybe even gloves. You're made to look like yourself, but better. Clean, quiet, tidy, respectable. And then comes the most morbid part of the entire process, though no one calls it that. They call it mourning photography. A photographer is summoned. He arrives with a large wooden box, a black cloth, and a blank expression honed by years of coaxing dignity out of the recently deceased. The family gathers around. They pose, they straighten collars, wipe their eyes, take deep breaths, and then they arrange you, sometimes seated in a chair, sometimes propped in bed, sometimes held upright between stands and wires. Your eyes are closed, unless someone takes the trouble to paint pupils onto your eyelids. If your eyes are still open, they might stare unnervingly into the camera. Either way, you are told to hold still. And you do. You're quite good at that now. The result is a photograph that looks almost normal at first glance. A family portrait, a group shot, a seated child with unusually stiff posture. Only upon closer inspection does something feel off. The angle of the head, the slackness of the jaw, the too perfect stillness. People frame these images. They display them on mantles. They mail copies to relatives. Here we are, the photo says, all together, one last time. It's not considered grotesque. It's sentimental, sweet even. A frozen moment of unity, where grief is captured with the same seriousness as a wedding or a christening. But even after the photograph is taken, you're not finished. Because now there's the matter of your hair. Victorian mourning customs are nothing if not thorough. And hair, being durable, personal, and symbolically rich, becomes the material of choice for grief. Yours is snipped before burial, carefully, lovingly. A lock, a braid, sometimes the entire length if it's long enough. It is cleaned, treated, and woven into elaborate patterns that resemble lace or embroidery. Sometimes it's pressed into the pages of a book. Other times, it's made into jewellery. Yes, jewellery. Mourning rings, brooches, lockets. Pieces with intricate curls of hair arranged under glass. Framed in gold, perhaps with your initials etched alongside. A small wearable tribute. A fragment of you that lives on in someone's palm, pinned to their chest, or strung around their neck. It's not a strange practice here. It's tradition. Common, expected. Hair holds memory. Hair endures. Your family might also create a mourning wreath, an elaborate, decorative wall piece made entirely of human hair, often yours mixed with those of other departed loved ones. These are displayed in parlours, not hidden away. They are meant to be admired, commented on, and maintained like any work of art. Death, after all, is something to be curated. Meanwhile, your funeral is being arranged, not rushed, not neglected, planned, dressed, and rehearsed like a miniature social event. The mourning clothes are already chosen, black for immediate family, subtle touches for acquaintances, veils, armbands, crepe fabric on the door. Your passing will be marked with all the proper symbols. If your family can afford it, they'll hire a carriage, order flowers, print calling cards edged in black. Even the stationery will mourn you. Your body, depending on funds and faith, might be placed in a wooden coffin with a modest lining, or a more elaborate one with brass handles and padded silk. Either way, it is closed eventually, but only after everyone has had a chance to look. Viewings are common. It's considered healing to see the deceased, to touch their hand, to whisper farewells. Sometimes someone will tuck a note into your pocket. A keepsake, a prayer, a button, something small, meaningful, and doomed to decay with you. Once the ceremony is over, once the procession has moved on, and your grave has been filled, the mourning continues. Proper mourning follows a timeline. Widows may wear black for a year or more. Friends may send condolences for months. No parties, no colour, no public laughter, until it's deemed respectful again. There are rules, there's etiquette, there are guidebooks on how to mourn well. Your absence becomes a script, and your survivors are expected to perform it faithfully. And still you linger, in photographs, in jewellery, in wreaths, in quiet rituals carried out on grey afternoons. You have become an object lesson in love and loss, immortalised not by your life, but by the spectacle of your death. People will remember how pale you looked in the final photo, how neatly your hair was arranged in the brooch, how small and fragile you seemed in the coffin. Your personhood fades, your symbolism sharpens. In the end, you become more precious in absence than you were in life. As a consumptive, your death has cultural value. It confirms things: the fragility of beauty, the inevitability of fate, the nobility of suffering. You were a tragedy in slow motion, and now a keepsake, a fashion accessory made of grief. You may have hoped that death would bring you peace, that once your body had stopped wheezing and your lungs had given up their final gurgling breath, you would be allowed some rest. But rest, like comfort, is not guaranteed in Victorian England, especially not for the poor. Depending on where and how you die, your body may not be buried at all. It may be claimed, not by grieving family, but by the cold hands of science. Because while society may have ignored you in life, the medical community is deeply interested in what you've left behind. You see, tuberculosis fascinates doctors, not because they can cure it, they still haven't figured that part out, but because of what it does. Your lungs, now filled with the fluid and scar tissue of a drawn-out suffocation, are a medical curiosity, a specimen, a cautionary tale in tissue. There are lectures to be given, books to be written, demonstrations to be performed, and all of them need examples. You, with your textbook symptoms and conveniently available corpse, are suddenly quite useful. If your family cannot afford a burial, or if you die in a hospital, workhouse, or sanitarium, you may find yourself on the cold metal surface of a dissection table within hours of death. There are laws against grave robbing now, but there's always demand for cadavers, and there's no shortage of justifications for bending the rules when it comes to the indigent and unnamed. Technically, consent is required. In practice, the consent of the poor is assumed. Because what are they going to do? Object? So you are carted down to the basement, or into a medical theatre, or into a quiet room behind a university lecture hall, and you are opened. The students gather, eyes wide with interest, notebooks in hand. The doctor, usually a man with a grey beard and a stained apron, begins the lesson. He talks about your age, your occupation if known, your symptoms, your decline. He speaks with a mixture of detachment and admiration. You are a classic case, he says. Very advanced. Textbook. As if that's a compliment. Your chest is sliced open and your lungs are removed. Slowly, carefully, for maximum educational value. They're weighed, measured, and passed around. Some students wince, others lean in. They poke and prod. They slice the tissue open to reveal the grey, sponge-like decay inside. This is what death looks like, they think. This is what a disease can do. You, who once gasped and choked and begged for air, are now a demonstration model for how lungs fail. Sometimes your remains are preserved, not buried. Preserved. In jars, in formaldehyde. Your lungs might sit on a shelf for decades, labelled and catalogued, and occasionally dusted off for a new generation of students to admire. Pulmonary tuberculosis, end stage, the label reads. Nothing about who you were, just the condition that killed you, the part that made you interesting. Or perhaps your body becomes part of a public exhibit. Victorians love a good anatomy museum. Rows of bones, jars of organs, wax models of diseases in their most horrifying forms. It's not morbid, it's educational. Children visit on school outings. Ladies in fine dresses clutch their parasols and peer through the glass. Your lung, floating silently in a cloudy solution, becomes a point of conversation. Look at that, someone says. Isn't it dreadful? And someone else replies, yes, she must have suffered terribly. Then they move on to the next jar. There's a certain irony to all of this. You were ignored while you were alive, treated like a burden, a nuisance, a warning. But now that you're dead, people can't stop looking at you. Your body is finally valued, just not by the people who loved you, if any remain. You have become data, evidence, a learning opportunity. Your pain, which once isolated you, is now seen as valuable. But only once it no longer affects you. Only once it's quiet enough to study. It's not all cold efficiency, though. Some doctors are genuinely fascinated, genuinely moved. They see your body as a puzzle to be solved, a tragedy to be prevented. They speak of reform, of hygiene, of public health. They want to understand the disease so others don't die the same way. But even the noblest intentions don't change your reality. You're still a body on a slab, a pair of lungs in a jar, a name scratched in faded ink on the back of a medical diagram, mispronounced at best, forgotten at worst. You might even appear in a publication, an illustration of your lungs sketched with cross-hatching and labelled with tiny numbers. Figure 2A, extensive cavitation. There you are, immortalised in medical literature, reduced to a plate number in a dusty book. Future students might flip past you on their way to more exciting ailments, but a few might pause, might wonder, might even say your name aloud if it's written down. That's the closest thing to memory you'll get. And what of the rest of you? The parts not deemed interesting enough to preserve? They're disposed of, unceremoniously, perhaps burned, perhaps buried in a shared grave with other medical rejects. There are no headstones, no flowers, just a pit, a lid, and a bureaucratic checkbox ticked off by someone who didn't know you were alive last week. You always knew you'd die poor, but you probably didn't expect to be dissected, displayed, studied, preserved. The final insult, or maybe the final irony, is that in death, you finally become useful. Not loved, not honoured, but useful. You are now an instrument in someone else's education. Your suffering has been harvested for knowledge. Your lungs are helping strangers pass their exams. And in a way, you do leave something behind. Not a legacy, exactly. More of a lesson, a visual aid for what happens when poverty, disease, and social neglect collide. You are a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when there's no cure, no help, and no one listening until it's too late. Your body may be gone, but tuberculosis isn't finished with you, not by a long shot. In fact, your death is just the beginning of what the Victorians like to call your lasting influence, which is a delicate way of saying your lungs may be buried, burned, or bottled, but what lived inside them is still very much alive. Tuberculosis doesn't die with its host. It lingers, in droplets, in whispers, in policy debates, in poems. You've been erased, but the disease that killed you is thriving, moving on to its next host, already halfway down the street. It might start with your family. Whoever lived with you, shared your room, your bed, your spoon, has almost certainly been exposed. Your sister, your mother, your youngest child who still slept against your chest at night. They've all inhaled what you exhaled. They may already be coughing and dismissing it as just a chill. They don't realise they're walking your path in reverse. All it takes is time, and tuberculosis has endless patience. The public response to your death is complicated. In private, you're mourned, perhaps. If you had family, they might hang your photo on the wall, wear a locket filled with your hair, say your name when they pray. But outside the home, you're a statistic, one of many. Your name becomes shorthand for a type of death. She died of consumption, they say, with a sigh, as if that explains everything. You're not remembered for who you were, only for how you died, and what your death says about the society that allowed it. Some Victorians try to romanticize you. They write sonnets about your fading beauty. They sketch delicate portraits of hollow cheeks and faraway eyes. Artists are obsessed with the aesthetic of decline, what they call the consumptive look. Poets call you pure, saintly, luminous. Never mind the coughing, the blood, the smell. You have become the ideal tragic figure. Young, fragile, dead just early enough to avoid becoming ordinary. Your real suffering is edited out in favour of a more elegant narrative, one that fits better on the parlour wall. Others are less sentimental. For them, your death is a warning. Health officials begin to take notice. Reformers mention your case in pamphlets. Politicians invoke your name when calling for better sanitation, stricter quarantine laws, and, depending on their level of fear, forced isolation of the sick. You're no longer a person, you're a case study. An example of what happens when the poor are allowed to breathe freely. Your lungs are used to justify everything from slum clearances to public bathhouses. People debate your legacy not because they care, but because you're now useful to their arguments. And then there are the scientists, still unsure, still arguing. Is tuberculosis a disease of the body or of the soul? Is it inherited, airborne, punishment? Some insist it spreads through miasma, bad air, rotting matter, moral decay. Others are starting to whisper about bacteria, tiny organisms passed between mouths and lungs and lives. A few radicals even believe it might be contagious, though saying so too loudly can get you laughed out of the room, or worse, accused of causing panic. Your story becomes fuel for these debates. The shape of your ribs, the colour of your sputum, the rate of your decline, all are picked over by men in dark suits who speak as if your life were a puzzle to be solved rather than a tragedy to be mourned. You are posthumously theorised, your body retrofitted into whatever model of disease fits the moment. No one agrees on what you were, only that you are unfortunate and that more like you are coming. And they are. Tuberculosis is far from finished. It continues to spread in the same crowded tenements, the same damp beds, the same gasping city streets. Your absence does nothing to slow it. If anything, it proves the disease's resilience. You're one of thousands, soon to be one of millions, a single thread in a growing tapestry of slow, quiet deaths. Your legacy is not just sorrow, it's statistical momentum. Still, your ghost lingers, not in a haunted house sort of way, but in the habits people develop to avoid becoming like you. Handkerchiefs over the mouth, refusing to shake hands, walking past coughing strangers a little too quickly. Parents tell children not to lean too close to the sick. Brides are warned to choose strong husbands, men with sound constitutions. Your name might not be spoken, but your presence shapes behaviour. You're remembered in avoidance, in caution, in the new rules quietly enforced around dinner tables and sickbeds. Ironically, in death, you gain a kind of power. You become the reason for change. If you were one of the few who died publicly, at a sanitarium, in a hospital, under a doctor's care, your case may be published. If you were well-born, your passing might even make the papers. People will read about your tragic decline, shake their heads, and say something ought to be done. They won't say what. They rarely do. But for a moment, your name will matter. You will have weight, but not for long. The world moves on. Another cough. Another death. Another body pulled under the surface of the ordinary. The poems grow stale. The medical notes fade. The policies shift focus. You become part of the background noise of an era drowning in its own suffering. Your lungs are gone. Your breath is gone. But tuberculosis lives on, hitching a ride in the lungs of the next you, and the next, and the next. Your legacy, then, is not a monument or a memory. It is a pattern, a ripple, a space in the world shaped by absence and filled by dread. You didn't ask to leave behind anything, but you did. Whether it's a medical diagram, a mourning brooch, or an empty chair at a table where no one speaks your name anymore, the trace of your illness endures. In the end, you've become exactly what Victorian society feared and what it secretly admired. A fragile symbol, a medical specimen, a warning a ghost in starched linen, coughing softly from behind the curtains of time. That's the end of tonight's long wheezing descent through the sick rooms and silence of Victorian tuberculosis, a world of blood-stained handkerchiefs, useless remedies, and slow erasure dressed up as poetry. Thanks for drifting through history with me. If you're still awake, feel free to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about what part would have undone you first. The endless coughing, the shameful glances, or the realization that your most useful contribution to society came after you stopped breathing. Sleep well, and breathe easy while you still can.